So let's go here to Raul to kick it off. Leah John, what is one Fernando Valenzuela moment that you can recall on or off the field?
That's a good question. I mean, if I close my eyes, all I see is Fernando's windmill windup and the high kick and his eyes looking to the stars, and then the ball's right on you. That's the memory I have of Fernando. I interviewed him twice through interpreters. Very quiet, very humble. That's the kind of person he was. And he became a broadcaster, which was kind of interesting. He worked on the Spanish broadcast of Dodgers baseball for 14 years, I think it was. A great man. I mean, ambassador, not just what he accomplished on the mound by doing this, but the ambassador he became for Dodger baseball, and in essence, baseball itself, for the Latino community up and down California, and obviously in Mexico. He relit the love of the Latino community for the grand old game. That's my memory of him.
Well, I obviously I remember him being with the Dodgers initially and that great run they had and the hysteria all across America. It's like, who is this guy? It was like the next coming of Mark the Bird Fidrich, but in terms of a sensation. But I do remember when he came to the Padres, I remember they traded for him. Did he come from St. Louis in a deal maybe? And I was like, Fernando Valenzuela, and he actually did really well. And I found myself really rooting for him in his few years here.
It's one of the few times I got lectured by somebody while doing a talk show in which that person who lectured me was correct. I've told you the story. I was doing a remote in the parking lot at Jack Murphy Stadium.
Yeah.
And this was after the Padres had gotten Fernando, and he was on his last legs. I mean, he had arm problems. His numbers had dropped drastically. And I just made an off-the-cuff comment about, did the Padres really need to do this? It comes off looking like a publicity stunt. And that was right. It was part of my 4 o'clock. Here's what's going on in the world of sports. Here's what Hacksaw thinks.
The best 15 minutes.
That's right. Damn good, too. And by 5 o'clock, who comes marching out of the Padre office down into the parking lot where we were set up and broadcasting but Larry Lucchino?
Hey.
And he took exception to my comment that this was a publicity stunt. And I looked at him and said, well, the stats don't bear out that this is anywhere near the Fernando that was there. Anyhow, he wound up going 13-8 the next year for the Padres.
Yeah.
I mean, he really had an integral impact for a short period of time. But what a great ambassador for baseball. Just phenomenal. And the hearts he touched, etc. So
yeah, he's like a hero. He's like a superhero. And I just love that when a ball player is so beloved, it goes beyond the scope of sports. Because a lot of everyday Americans that don't care about baseball know about Fernando.
Sure. We'll wait and see. This first game of the World Series, people going to show up wearing sombreros?
Yeah, you believe it. Yeah, for sure.
Thanks for the comment, Roll.
Okay, let's go here to Callan. Callan has a bunch of comments for us. He says, howdy, gents. Saw in the wake of Steve Ballmer opening up the Intuit Dome and his commitment to the Clippers, who would you put on your Mount Rushmore of sports owners?
Well, but that Mount Rushmore's only got, what, 4 stone faces?
Yeah.
I mean, how many great owners have we had in all the different sports? And by the way, Ballmer's never gotten the Clippers to the NBA Western Conference Finals, much less the championship series. So I can't put Ballmer up on any Mount Rushmore for a period of time until they actually accomplish things. If you're asking me if it was just the NBA Mount Rushmore, it's got to involve Red Auerbach, Boston. Mm-hmm. It's obviously got to involve Jerry Buss, Lakers. And after that, are we just talking owners? Or we're talking Mount Rushmore of players? I mean, we got so many phenomenal players. So that's a too simplistic question to a very complex set of talent levels that you got to look at. But Ballmer's heart's in the right place, and we'll see. I think it's a lottery team by virtue of the injury to Kawhi and the loss of Paul George, and they do have picks, and then we'll see what they do in terms of free agency, because the one thing about him, he's been really active. I mean, he tried to do it with Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, and they got close, and then they broke down with injuries. They tried to reinvent it with what they did with Paul George and with Kawhi Leonard, and they got close. And now free agency and Kawhi's injuries have dismantled that drive to the postseason. But the guy's unbelievably successful as a businessman. My goodness. I mean, the litany of things he's done in the computer industry is just through the roof. And he must be a great salesman because he's gotten all these players to want to come play for him. And this stadium, this arena, is shiny. It's really spectacular.
And Steve Ballmer's like the Energizer Bunny, man. That guy
Yeah.
is still going all the time. And he went to college with Bill Gates. He was just interviewed on 60 Minutes like a few weeks ago.
Yes.
And yeah, he came in as I think CEO of Microsoft like in 1979, and so obviously he's one of the richest men in the world. So good on those guys on the Clippers. Yeah.
So we go on. Callum, thank you for the comment.
Okay. I had another comment about this on Callan's point. It seems to me that sports owners, there more of them are villains than there are heroes. I think about Marge Schott or the former owner of the Clippers,
Donald Sterling.
Donald Sterling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there are some bad citizens who are rich people that have money that you say, my God, how did they get to where they got in life when you understand who these people are?
But there's very few Peter Seidlers.
Yeah, exactly. There's very few successful entrepreneurs like Bob Kraft. And Steinbrenner was unbelievably successful in the shipbuilding business, but he was so bombastic as a Yankees owner that a lot of people hated him. So it comes and goes. Do they win? How do they win? How are they viewed in the community if they win? I mean, we check a lot of different boxes here. The O'Malleys are, I think, the modern day greatest baseball owners of all time. The Maras, the Rooneys, the greatest, obviously, NFL owners of probably all time. Jerry Buss, just absolutely phenomenal during the course of his life with Laker basketball. So we move on.
Okay. I'll give you like a little taste of this. This is what's been going on in the chat. This is from Killa Noez. The 2-3-2 format, road teams have the advantage, don't they?
Well, if you win one of the first two, yeah. You get into a hole 0-2, now you got problems. Again, Fall Classic, we're talking great teams here. You can lose a game at home in a Fall Classic, but you could probably win that game back at Yankee Stadium. So if you're going to pull off an upset, if you win one of the first two on the road, that really puts you in the driver's seat. But obviously, these are not the Marlins, the White Sox, or Pirates here. We're talking Yankees, Dodgers, and they have the ability to walk into the other guy's yard and come away with a victory or two.
See, as a kid, I remember, at least I think it was the World Series. It was 2-2, 1-1-1. And that 75 Red Sox is like so important in my life. And if I recall, they would go from one city to the next game would be back. And so they were heroes and villains, and they would flip, the spot, when they go to the opposing stadium. And that was so much fun. And the pressure points were so interesting. And when they did 2-3-2, it took a little bit of that off,
Well, but when you're going coast to coast travel, that's really hard with one off day. And the other thing is TV schedules now come into play here as to when they want these games aired on TV. So, and then, if you go 7 games, then you get a fatigue factor going. You're playing, you're getting right back on the plane, you're going across country,
right,
getting off the plane, and then you got to play the next day, and then you got to back on the plane and come back. So that's why it's structured a little bit different. The Players Association, I think, had a little bit of impact there. By the way, they're not playing they were not playing in November when you and I were kids watching the Fall Classic. It was over by the second week of October.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, things are a lot different now. Do you think they'll shorten the season to 154?
Do you know any owners who want to give any money back?
Yeah, no.
Okay, you just answered your dumb question. Thank you.
Okay.
Next
All right.
one.
Let's go here to Roy. He says Dodgers in 5 or 6. Dodgers in 5 if they win the first 2 at home. If Dodgers split at home, Dodgers in 6. Dodger lineup will win the World Series for the Dodgers.
The only thing you're discounting, Roy, though, is Dodger pitching, Johnny Allstaff, which AKA is bullpen day. That is Aaron Judge, and that is Soto, and that is Stanton, and that is Verdugo, and that is that young shortstop who's playing really well. I mean, the Yankees have a lot of bats. And so I'm not sure that Dodger bullpen day, Johnny Allstaff, as Dave Roberts called him, I don't know that the Dodger bullpen can escape all things Yankees. The flip side, Yankees have the edge in starting pitching, but I don't think the Yankees bullpen is all that great. And that could mean if the Dodgers are trailing, the Dodgers, I think, have the ability to put things together. So it's gonna be a fun series. It's so cool.
Roy is a loyal follower, and he posts a lot in Instagram and here as well. And yeah, he's a huge Dodger guy. So, the Dodger fans, they've been so close for so many years, getting to the playoffs and getting ejected. I wonder if they're just really nervous. Like, is Dave Roberts going to blow it again?
No, I don't think so, because Dave's kind of preached to these guys, let's just go play your game. Let's just play Dodger baseball. Let's have some fun. And even though there was a lot of pressure when they were down 2-1 to the Padres, what did they do? They just went out and they just took control of the series, and they had a lot of fun. That's a really, really good Dodger roster. And I saw Roy. I thought, I've never met anybody that said oxygen intake problems. He was a little blue. He's a Dodger fan. That's why. That's why Dodger likes me. I showed up with my Dodger hoodie last week, and what color am I wearing today?
Yeah,
well, I think it is. I'm not sure. I'm colorblind. That's a problem.
No, that's blue.
That's blue. Okay.
Yeah.
What shade of blue is it?
I think that's like Hawaiian blue, like the Detroit Lions.
Okay. And what the hell are you wearing? Is that oil can gray or something?
Something like that.
Yeah, from the garage. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Next question. Thanks, Roy.
Okay, let's go to Angel. Age 4, I knew how big Fernando Mania was when Televisa televised Dodgers game wherever Fernando Valenzuela pitched, albeit on tape delay. When he pitched, it was poetry in motion. Gracias por la memoria, Toro.
El Toro. I agree with you. Well said. And TV did not do much in terms of covering Major League Baseball. And when Fernando Mania arrived, they televised his starts. And when he was removed, it went off the air. They televised him. It's like Japanese baseball. That's what they did when I think it was Ichiro, when Suzuki first came to Seattle. They would televise the Mariners up until the point he got taken out of the game. And when he left the game or he didn't play, they didn't televise. It was strange. Oh, but his impact as an ambassador in baseball. And like I say, the ceremony in Mexico in which you remember your family members who are deceased, I guess it's called the Day of the Dead. I think it's on November 1st, which I think is next Friday. But evidently, they're going to have Dodger pennants and the Mexican flag in memory of Fernando Valenzuela. Nationwide. Cool. Nationwide, that is cool.
When I think of Fernando Valenzuela, I always just think of him with Vin Scully.
Yeah.
And they had a really nice relationship, and Vin is always telling Fernando's story. So it's always fun to go back and listen to those broadcasts.
I remember him vividly talking about, he'd do the pregame. He'd start the broadcast. It's Sombrero Saturday at Dodger Stadium.
Nice.
Pull up a chair. Fernando is going to start high school. So.
Well, I saw like a clip online just a few days ago where Vin was thrown out the first ball, and then he kind of faked an arm injury and goes, "I need another lefty." And then Fernando came out of the dugout, and this is like a few years ago. But Fernando, he I saw that photo of him online that he had to take a step back from his broadcasting duties, and he had lost so much weight, and then boom, he's gone.
He went very quickly.
Yeah.
And he's a very private person. And even as a player, as a superstar, making mega money, he was just a really private person. But so great story. Angel, thank you for joining us.
Okay. Well, here's Killa also says, number 34 remembrance patch will be worn.
Exactly.
So that's cool. I like seeing that.
I wonder if the Dodgers will wear a black armband as part of their uniforms. That would be kind of significant, because the minute you see that, the minute you know what it references.
Oh yeah.
That'd be interesting if they wear a black armband. I don't recall. Basic gray.
Now we're back.
It's your black shirt.
Yeah, that must be what it is.
Oil stained.
Okay, let's go here to Willie. He goes, been a baseball fan in Ohio since the late 50s. When I watched Fernando pitch Mike Brito behind home plate with the radar gun and Vin Scully, talking about him, during the play-by-play, it was as close to heaven as baseball could be.
It's so cool. Mike Brito, a legendary scout. And he was the pioneer in Mexico for the Dodgers, in Cuba for the Dodgers. And he did stuff in Japan. I mean, the Dodgers internationally have been one of the greatest franchises of all time. And of course, the Dodgers are the ones that broke the color barrier with Jackie Robinson. But I went to Vero Beach 3 years in a row to do my sports talk show there when I was on the old 690. And once we became a San Diego, LA station, and they sent me to Vero Beach to do my show for a whole week. It was just an absolute thrill. I'd see Brito. He'd walk the back lots. He had a big Panama hat. He had a beige Panama hat. Always wore a floral shirt with a tie,
Yeah.
and a pink suit or a beige suit.
Yeah.
He was dressed to the nines as a fashion plate, and always had a cigar. Just interesting persona. But boy, what a really good scout.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool where you're kind of known as the guy that discovered Fernando Valenzuela,
amongst others.
Yeah, so good on him. He's got that relationship with Fernando going back many years. But I do remember that sometimes the TV cameras would focus on him a little bit, and you're like, oh yeah, that guy,
with the gun.
Okay. This has been going on. This 232-22111 according to 4RXLA. The World Series has never been 22111. You're thinking of the NBA Finals that went to that format for about 20 years before going back to 232.
I could have sworn it was 22111 back in the day, but that was a long time ago. And again, long time ago, you talked about the Reds and the Red Sox. Well, that's a short plane flight. Even if it's the running Redbirds, St. Louis Cardinals, and the Yankees,
yeah,
that's a short flight. When you start talking about coast to coast, that's different.
It is, but it's always confusing. Like at first, it was the different NBA and the NHL all did them differently, and now I find myself every year I got to remember, okay, this is the wild card round, so it's best of 3. The next one's best of 5, and then best of 7 for the AL, NLCSs,
and then World Series.
Yeah,
and the World Series. Back in the day, I bet you didn't know this, the World Series was a best of 9.
That must be like before Babe Ruth, right?
Well, that was the era of Joe Jackson and the White Sox Black Sox scandal. That was a best of 9 series.
Interesting.
Yeah,
that's a lot of baseball.
Next question.
Okay, let's move on down the list to let's go here to John. And he says Joey Bosa is a China doll. He gets hurt on the first play of the season. Sheesh.
Yeah, 5 years in a row he's had something, and it's always something. It's not that he's not in shape. It's just that he gets hurt. Guys fall on his ankle. He'd roll up on his knees. Now he's got a hip issue. He's not practicing at all. I think this will be his final year here, even though he and Khalil Mack both restructured down their Charger contracts to help him with a salary cap. You're not going to pay this guy $25 million or $30 million because he's always hurt. Can't stay on the field. It's too bad. He started like a house of fire. I always thought, though, he was really undersized to be a warrior-type defensive end. He was more of a rush guy, and they've kind of employed him more as a linebacker than anything else. But real tough time for him right now. Not playing at all, not contributing at all, and no sense at all when he's going to be back.
We had fun Monday night watching the game together.
Yeah.
And I remember when the camera went to Bosa, and you see him in street clothes, and you're like, oh, here we go again.
Yeah, we got the wrong Bosa, that's for certain.
Definitely.
Now, Nick's had injuries too. Nick's had 2 major injuries in his career in San Francisco. It probably comes with the position those guys play. John, thank you.
Okay, let's keep on a trucking here. And 4RXLA was commenting here. He goes, Munson died in 78. Now, he clarified it was 79 in a future tweet here, but which was the same year Dent hit the home run to put the New York Yankees in the playoffs. Reggie hit 3 homers in 77. Munson was also on the 76 World Series.
Mm-hmm. Those dates are kind of hazy for me. I covered the Munson tragedy. It was just a terrible thing to have to cover. And I was friends with Thurman Munson. And I worked in Akron. He lived in North Canton. Actually, he came up one night and stayed in the studio for a whole hour just taking phone calls just because he wanted to hang around.
Really?
He was a neat guy. Played at Kent State right next door. And I covered that funeral. Oh, I covered the plane crash. When I got a sign down there, so you need to get to the Akron Canton Airport. There's been a plane crash, and the feeling is it might be Thurman Munson's plane, and it was. And he was on an off day, and he was practicing takeoffs and landings and some type of small Lear jet, and he missed the runway, went through a fence, and he broke his neck, and he got trapped. They couldn't get him out. He couldn't get out of the cockpit, and of course there was a fire, and he died because of that, and they couldn't get in to save him. And the funeral was just, the 2 things in the world that I'll never forget was covering the funeral And then I covered the Marshall University plane crash in West Virginia in 1970. But to see the Yankees, I mean, they were all at the front on both sides in the church in North Canton. And to see Steinbrenner and to see Billy Martin just wept through the whole process. And Reggie and Catfish. Oh man, it was terrible. It took the Yankees forever to kind of recover from Thurman Munson's death. A great player. Holy cow. What a leader. Not, he was not going to hit 45 home runs. He was not going to bat 328. But just what firebrand, is that the correct term? I mean, you talk about in the clubhouse, this is my team. You are going to follow me. I am picking up the flag and we're going to go get it done. And he just played. He grinded. He was a really good guy.
It's interesting that you were at that funeral with all those Yankees there. That must be like watching a Hollywood movie kind of unfold with all these celebrity ball players, wearing suits at the funeral. That would have been an interesting event.
Yeah, it was just emotional. And I was doing freelance for the Associated Press. So I had set up that when they did eulogies, I was able to record the eulogies, and I fed them back to the Associated Press radio network in Washington, D.C. And then I did live, not live reports, but I did voice reports from the site before the ceremony, right after the ceremony. It was like being in a press box at a Major League playoff game. There's so many media that were there. We all were cordoned off to a certain aspect of the church, but something I never, ever forget. And so it's interesting. You go from a young broadcaster who was going to be a disc jockey and play the hits to doing sports, to covering Thurman Munson's funeral and covering the tragedy on the hillside at West Virginia at Marshall University. So done a lot of things, including broadcast some bad football games and some Super Bowls that turned out to be bad games too.
That was a bad one. Yeah. Yeah, it was. Okay, let's keep moving on. Let's go to Greg. I want us to talk about USC. He says, Lee, what are your thoughts now on Lincoln Riley at SC? Is he on the hot seat?
A lot of people not real happy about this. Hey, how has this worked out? This Pac-12 to the Big Ten. How has this worked out? If you separate the Oregon Ducks at 6-0,
right?
Everybody else from that conference that went to this conference, their combined record is 4-10. And then if you add in those guys who went from that conference to the ACC, that's been pretty bleeping bad too. So this whole thing of USC, UCLA, and Washington, Oregon going there, and Cal and Stanford going there, that hadn't worked out real well. Not worked out well for Utah in the Big 12, Arizona in the Big 12. Arizona State's had a decent start. Colorado's been some good, some bad. But the guys who went to the Big 10, 4-10, and there's still half a season to be played.
See, I that makes sense to me because, back in the day, roll the clock back 20, 30 years ago when the Pac-5 or Pac-12 was a legitimate Power 5. But before the Pac-12 broke up, they were like a 4.5. They were not at the same level as the other four conferences, but yet they were still a power conference. So I'd imagine that the recruiting probably had declined over the last 10 or 20 years, is my hunch. And we kind of knew that they were going to get smacked around in the Big Ten and even in the ACC, Stanford and Berkeley. You figured they had no chance.
And in terms of Greg's question about Lincoln Riley, he's catching a lot of crap for game management. Yeah, I mean, Riley on the left hand will say, hey, we got 4 losses. We were in the game to the final possession, all 4. Well, the other hand should be saying, yeah, I screwed up final possession play calling, use or lack of use of timeouts, and plays called that resulted in failures or turnovers or blocked field goals or loss of downs. They've been right there, but they're sitting there at 3 and 4 because I think his game management has really been substandard. So, and their defense is not grossly improved. And then they lost one of their defensive tackles that decided to opt out and sit out the rest of the season in Bear Alexander. And they haven't been able to run the ball consistently. And Danton Lynn's defense has now given up lots of yardage and lots of points and lots of chunk plays. So not a good situation at Southern Cal right now. Is he in jeopardy? No, but a lot more was expected of him. I mean, ever since the middle of last season, their record's abysmal. He's got 5-8 since the middle of last season.
Well, I just remember he was at Oklahoma And even at Oklahoma, he wasn't over the top successful, if I recall.
He was great offensively, and defensively it was destructive.
Exactly. Now, where did Lincoln Riley coach prior to Oklahoma?
Somebody's assistant, somebody's hot coordinator somewhere.
But an offensive coordinator,
Mhm.
definitely. Yeah, it's interesting how these guys they become like bright as a star and they can fade real quick. So I wonder if that's going to be his legacy.
It's a burning question as to whether or not long term, if this thing doesn't turn the corner and improve, and he's got to recruit. And I mean, he's doing it with a 6th-year quarterback that nobody knew was going to be this competitive. And Miller Moss is just he's fierce. He's a great leader, and he makes plays. He also takes chances and throws the ball where he should never throw it. His turnover ratio is kind of high. So I don't think Lincoln Riley's in trouble right now. But if they can't flip this within the next year and a half, he might be in trouble.
Wow. Yeah, here we go.
Greg, good question. Thank you.
Okay, let's go here to Rob, to Bob. He says, I'm bullish on the Dodgers bullpen game, but I am concerned with overtaxing the pen for games 5, 6, and 7 if necessary.
Well, I think item one is, what do you get out of Flaherty? Flaherty's been good. Flaherty's not been good. That's a big issue. What do you get out of Buehler? Now, Buehler has thrown 7 shutout innings in a row his last 2 starts. He had that bad inning against the Padres when the defense betrayed him, but he stayed in the game. He's the one that told Dave Roberts, who went to pull him in about the 6th inning of that game, get the F off the mound. I'm finishing this inning. And he did. So he's got 7 straight shutout innings. But what do you get out of Buehler against the Yankees' big bats? Because if your starters, what happens to Yamamoto? If your starters get knocked around in the 2nd and 3rd inning, do you have to go to the bullpen early? Or do you let them take one for the team and you just lose the game? That's the big issue. And then when the Dodgers beat the Padres, their analytics guys did a hell of a job of matching right-hander versus Padre right-hander, choking them off. And the next inning, when the left-handers came up, they brought the left-handers in. They choked them off. But that was a one-time occurrence. So the overuse issue really becomes an issue, especially if a Buehler or a Yamamoto isn't going 4 or 5 innings into a game. Then it really puts pressure on you. And then obviously you got the bullpen game. Now, the bullpen game is supposed to be, and it's a real valid question, Bob. The bullpen game, your guy's only supposed to throw 1 frame. Every guy out of the pen, they'll use 8 guys, will throw 1 inning in a bullpen game. Maybe you ask Honeywell to go a 2nd inning, or maybe Landon Knack. But you're asking your closer and the setup guys to give me 1 quality inning each, which means you can come back the next day and use them. But if somebody gets into a 32 pitch inning, a stress inning, about stress, dealing with me. I mean, you get into a stress inning, John, now that impacts everybody else if that guy can't get out of that 1 inning outing.
Isn't it amazing how we thought the whole Dodger pitching staff was going to hell in a handbasket?
That's what I wrote at midseason when they were, their starting rotation was a disaster. The bullpen had a 6.58 ERA for like a month.
Yeah.
And all their guys are on the disabled list. And somebody in New York wrote a column that said, the Dodgers, they got the best pitching staff in the world on the disabled list. Look at all the Dodger arms that are having surgery, or, from Glasnow to Kershaw to all the young pups who pitch pretty well. They're all on the DL. So in essence, the New York media is right. Dodgers have a hell of a pitching staff. It's all on the disabled list.
But they're in the World Series. I mean, they've been doing, they're hitting, but hell, they shut out the Padres for 24 innings, and a lot of these guys, are playing really well. Blake Trinan is a lot of fun to watch, by the way.
On we go.
On we go. Willie has a comment here, kind of clarifying things for us. The 75 World Series was 2 in Boston, 3 in Cincy, and games 6 and 7 in Fenway. Was this way for as far as I can remember into the 1940s.
Okay, well, we may have confused it with travel in the NBA, and even that's now been changed. Same thing in the National Hockey League. But that World Series, the Red Sox, that was the Carlton Fisk.
Yeah,
World Series. Oh, that was, people still talking about it. It's 2024, and we're talking about what happened in 75 because we remember.
Oh yeah, who was the other guy? Was it Rico Cardi? I think was on the Red Sox.
Rico Petrocelli. No?
I don't know.
Rico
I'm
Carter
getting
might have been there too
confused.
at one time.
But I just remember there were a lot of characters. Again, it was just an impressionable time in my life.
You didn't like George C. Scott. George Scott was there too.
Oh, I was thinking of the guy that did the movie Patton.
No, but George Scott, the slugger, that was a persona too.
Oh yeah, it was all those characters. It was Luis Tion, who we talked about a few weeks ago. That was a great series. It was so much fun.
On we go. Let's do a couple more here before we put a lid on it.
Okay, we're going to go to social media here, and let's get some Raider talk here. This is from Fitness Task. Did we go over this one last week? I'm not sure if we did. We need the number 1 pick in the 2025 draft. Brady is pretty much calling the shots now. Hire Bill Belichick and draft Shedeur Sanders.
Well, the only problem is that they've given Tom Telesco a multi-year contract, and I don't think that Telesco could work with Belichick if Belichick wants full control. Now, Belichick wants to be a head coach. I guess anything is humanly possible. But they're going to get, probably the way they are constructed right now with all the injuries and the problems, they're going to get a high first-round draft pick, and it might be Shedeur Sanders. It might be somebody else. This will be fascinating to watch through the rest of the season. But is Antonio Pierce the right guy? I have reservations whether he's the right guy to be head coach. But their roster they got holes in so many places in their roster at running back because they let Josh Jacobs go. Now Devontae Adams has been traded, and they just continue to have injury problems. So a lot of their young players, and their offensive line has never been what they thought the offensive line would be. It's the left tackle Colton Miller from UCLA, who's like a 7 or 8 year veteran, and that's just interchangeable parts, and none of them ever stand out. I'm sorry, you got problems. You're a Raider fan. You got problems.
Someone needs to call Art Shell and Gene Upshaw to show up for work here. But you're talking about maybe Shedeur Sanders. Who are like the top 3 or 4 names for the Heisman this year?
Oh, well, the biggest disappointment has been the running back out of Oklahoma State and have not had a good season, Gordon. A lot of people thought that's a lock. Sanders, his running mate, Travis Hunter, the wide receiver cornerback, plays 102 snaps a game. He's probably will get more votes than Shedeur Sanders right there. I'd have to think. I'm so involved with baseball and the NFL. I haven't paid much attention to who are the other hot candidates out there. Maybe Dylan Gabriel at the University of Oregon. I would have thought the Alabama quarterback, but for some reason they got problems with the Crimson Tide. It's not Jalen Milroe's fault, but they're not getting the kind of support that I thought Milroe was going to get, because I had him as probably a preseason All-American and maybe a Heisman Trophy candidate. The Ohio State quarterback he's a game manager. He's not a game winner. Michigan doesn't have a quarterback right now. That's become a big issue. Obviously, Clemson's got a freshman quarterback. The other Florida schools are. I will say one of the dark horses, and he's not getting any ink at all, but you should pay attention. Cam Ward at Miami, who used to be at Washington State. He's having an unbelievable statistics season for the Hurricanes. He's going to probably get votes as we go through the second half of the season. The Canes are unbeaten. Nobody in the country is paying any attention. I think they might be maybe 6th in the nation. So just off the top of my head, those are names to consider.
What about the kid from Boise State, the running back?
Well, Ashton Jeanty. Yeah, for sure. I do think a segment of the community in the Deep South, it's Mountain West Conference, it's Boise State, and we're not voting for somebody from Boise State that plays 1AA football. I mean, he said his statistical season is just absolutely amazing, and I think Jeanty's going to get a lot of votes. I don't know if he's going to get enough votes on the Eastern Seaboard, especially in the Deep South, because it's the Mountain West Conference.
Yeah, like Marshall Faulk got screwed. This guy might get screwed. Let's keep going. Talk some Padres here. This is with Parallel Post. Dylan Cease is basically Rick Sutcliffe without the nasty forkball. Dodgers exposed him. He is young. Like you, he may recover and be a viable option for the Padres in 3 years. Been listening to Hacksaw since I was a kid.
Good choice. Good taste. Nothing wrong with Cease. He should have never been allowed to go out there and pitch on 3 days rest after an 82-pitch outing the prior start against the Dodgers. Towards the end of the season, he wasn't the same pitcher. And they had solved all his mechanical problems with the delivery and where his glove was and the placement of the ball. And he had that dominant run where he threw the no-hitter, and he had a bunch of one-hitters, but it kind of got away from him at the end of the season. But what happened to Cease at the end, I think, is mismanagement by Mike Shildt. That put it all at his front door. And they're going to have to live with that through the offseason because this was their opportunity. This was a complete team, a good team. Because this team also stopped hitting along the way because the Dodgers just were dominant with a pitching staff that kind of came back from the dead.
Yeah. Just we're replaying these old memories that are just killing me. But when I think of Rick Sutcliffe, I mean, there's obviously he's the Cubs in '84 and he's with the Dodgers at one point very early in his career. But did you ever hear the audio clip of him showing up in the Padres broadcast booth with Matt Vasgersian, and Sutcliffe was drunk off his ass and was
I think I heard about it. Yeah.
yeah, and he's basically saying, Matty V, what are you doing here? You know, you should be on a national broadcast. You know, you're too good to be here for the Padres. And then shortly thereafter, Matty V was the
MLB Network and still is to this hour.
Yeah. So I always think of
Good
Rick
guy.
Sutcliffe. That's a great story.
Well, Sutcliffe was in Cleveland too. I mean, he was feisty and he was competitive. He was combative, and he squeezed every ounce of baseball out of his arm. He was a good pitcher, good personality. I love him in Chicago too.
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's keep on moving. We'll go to talk a little more Padres, and this is with Mike. He says, Profar stopped hitting after the All-Star break. It wasn't just the playoffs he didn't hit. It was the entire second half. How do you allow this guy to continue to hit in the third slot when he clearly reverted back to being a 240 hitter? I would have moved the rookie up to the third slot and rotated Profar back in the lineup.
Well, you're correct. Profar had 2 really bad months in there. But, you know, every one of those guys outside of Tatis and Jackson Merrill, every one of those guys really had some crappy months. I mean, Manny had a month where he hit 209. That's Manny. And then, of course, in the playoffs, he hit 179. Arise had a really bad month. Now, that might have been linked to the thumb injury. But every one of those guys had some substandard months. The season is such a grind. My God, John, it's 162 games. It's 6 months. And those guys played every minute of every game. You know, at the end of the season, I think the burning question is, what do you do with Jackson Merrill? Should you have bumped him up? I mean, he was hitting pretty well. He had one spell in early spring where he might have hit 220. And I thought, oh, pitching's caught up to him. And then we get to the next month on the calendar and he's hitting home runs. And then you obviously saw the amazing hot spell. So, you know, did they need to rework it? They got a tough call with Profar. And Mikey, you raise a good question. Because he played on the minimum contract because they signed him so late after Colorado gave up on him. And now he's hired Scott Boras. And Boras he's going to give A.J. Preller a notebook this thick with all this statistical data because that's the sales presentation they make on behalf of everybody. And he's going to probably ask for $10 million. Well, I'm not giving. This was a career year. Profar hit 280. Career year. But he was 240 for the rest of his life. Mm-hmm. And then he didn't hit in the playoffs. I'm not going from a 1.5 base to 10 million just because Scott Boras said, read the story. Because we're talking about super utility guy who had a career year. Would I give him 5 to start? Yeah, maybe I give him 5 with bonus things if dude hits 300. But again, at the end of the season, what happened? So tough call. Padres got tough calls. Like I said, they got 7 players they got to make decisions on.
I remember it was like roughly in mid-June. And Profar was hitting like 350 or something like that. And he was leading the league, I think, in OPS or near the very top. And I was thinking, holy crap, Profar. And then I remember his kid came out, was lobbying for him to get to the All-Star game. That was a fun story. I like Profar, the dude. But it is true. He definitely tailed off. I think the tail off began in late June because I remember going into the All-Star, like he had cooled off.
The innings pile up on you. And he's slightly built.
Yeah.
We're not talking about, you know, man mountain here. The wear and tear factor on these guys is just absolutely amazing. So, you know, that's why I thought Jackson Merrill was going to tail off. He did not. He just hung in there and he hit beyond everybody's expectations. And then he went to the new position. He played like he'd been out there his entire life. And it was pretty impressive. And he's kind of a student of the game too. So I hope they keep Profar, you know, but I'm not paying him $10 million because Scott Boras is on the phone.
Yeah. Well, you know, Profar is not going to get a ton of offers for huge money. Mm-hmm. So I think he wants
creatively finance a deal.
But he wants to be here in San Diego, just like Arise does.
But Boras is not going to let the guy be here in San Diego for 1.5 or $2 million.
I mean, yeah, probably not.
You're going to have to bump him to 5 and maybe throw incentives. Jackson Merrill deserves more than the second-year minimum of $800,000, so maybe you bump him to 3 or 4 with incentives. The Arise thing is a tough call because according to arbitration charts, he's going to go from 8.5 to probably 14.6. But are you going to give a 14.6 contract to a singles hitter who doesn't play a good position defensively, doesn't run the bases, and has no power? 14.6 or 14.8, whatever, singles hitter, that's a lot of money.
There's a huge debate online about the value of Luis Arise, because his numbers don't necessarily show the value that he brings by putting the ball in play all the time. I tend to like the guy.
Should he be batting lower in the order rather than get a guy on base who can't run the base as well? Would you be better served to have him batting 5th or 6th when you got the big bats on the bases and he puts the ball in play that way?
Yeah, well, I don't think he's a leadoff guy. He's no Ricky Henderson.
No.
But I thought 2 would be a good spot in the lineup, but you're right, man. Yeah, 6 could work. Maybe even
if he clogs up the bases, that's an issue.
Yeah.
So that's where we are. November into December, going to be very interesting in Padreville just because of the contracts they've got to hand out. And we've talked a little bit about Cease. We haven't talked about Michael King, and then there's Tanner Scott, if they could keep him. But man, he's going to get a lot of money on the open market as a legitimate closer.
Roy in the live chat's been saying that Tanner Scott's going to the Dodgers next year.
Anything's possible.
He's trying to stick it to the Padre fans.
Okay, one more here.
Okay, let's go here. We'll talk a little bit of Chargers football, and this is from 619 Ivan. Technically, there's only 3 or 4 teams worth of being called good teams in the NFL. So if you beat any of the other 29 teams, it doesn't matter because they are bad teams that anybody can beat. Terrible take. Go back to talking about baseball.
Oh, thank you for the vote of confidence about the content and the topics on the table. Hey, at the end of the day, they got bludgeoned by a substandard Pittsburgh Steeler offensive team. At the end of the day, they got beat by Arizona, which was 2-4 and played really erratically. So how really good are the Chargers? Yes, they have 3 wins, but look at who they beat. They got a Raider team that is listless. You got a Carolina team, which is on the floor, face down, and got a Denver team that's in the middle of it's going to be a long rebuild with a rookie quarterback. Those are the 3 they beat. Now, I thought they'd be 7-1. They're sitting there at 3-3. Now, they should beat New Orleans and they should beat Cleveland because Cleveland's lost all its key players. So that'd make them 5-3. But 5-3 is a bit of a far cry from 7-1. And by the way, you still got to play Kansas City twice.
And they played them once already, right?
Yeah. No, they have not.
No.
So, or did they? I guess they did.
I think they lost to the Chiefs.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My bad. But they still got a bunch of key games that have to be played, and they got to go play the Raiders at the end. They got to go to Kansas City at the end. So they got to go to Denver at the end. So there's a lot of stuff that still has to happen. I thought they'd be 7-1 and instead they'll be 5-3 and with a bunch of injuries. And I'll be glad to talk baseball with you anytime, Ivan, because I can cover that too.
Well, it's interesting to talk about how many bad teams there are because you go back in history, there's always been, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going 0-16 or whatever it was. There's always been a lot of bad teams. But in your opinion, was there a golden era in the NFL where we saw so many stars and such dynamic play and we really didn't have any horrible teams?
With the salary cap and everything, the methodology of business in the NFL is everybody be 500, which means we put great games. But you do have eras. You have eras of great players. I mean, the 49er era with Bill Walsh, with Montana, then Steve Young, that was absolutely phenomenal. The era of Belichick and Tom Brady, that's a special era, that once in a lifetime for a franchise. Now, the rest of the league could be mediocre, et cetera, as Ivan alludes to. But the NFL business is, if you do a good job in player personnel, because we all operate by the same financial rules, if you do it and don't get guys hurt, you should be able to put a good product on the field. Doesn't always work that way vis-a-vis, look at what the Cleveland Browns have become. But so, yeah, there've been great stretches of time with great teams, Dan Marino and Miami, and obviously what Brady did with 6 rings. And look, you got to have things fall in place. Do you draft well? Do you have a good quarterback? Do you get a stroke of luck and don't get guys hurt? Yeah. And otherwise, if you don't draft well, if you waste money on the salary cap and you make mistakes and you get burned, that's who you are. That's your management team more than anything else. Organizations win titles. Organizations find the right players, pay the right players, draft the right players, and if they do go into free agency, get the right players. Organizations fail because you're Mike Brown in Cincinnati, you're Bidwell in St. Louis, or at this point, Haslam up in Cleveland. That's a long answer. You asked. That's the end of Philosophy 101 today. Thank you for coming to class.
For me, that the Niners in the 80s was for me a
State of the art.
because think about the big teams that they faced. The Redskins were really good. The Cowboys were good. The Giants were really good. The Bears were really good. And then even in the late 80s, if I recall, the Rams got to be very good too.
Short period.
Yeah. So that was a pretty nice era.
They had a good run. DeBartolo was a great owner. As controversial as Eddie DeBartolo Jr. was, he was a great owner, and he had great football people and what they drafted and where they found these guys. Jerry Rice came out of Mississippi Valley State. Johnny Taylor, who was a very good wide receiver, came out of Delaware State.
That's right. Yeah.
And then they got Ricky Waters. And so organizations find players, a.k.a. Pittsburgh Steelers, Chuck Noll, and historically what the Steelers became, a.k.a. Al Davis, and whom he got, where he got, and that great run they had with the silver and black and those Super Bowl trophies. Things changed. Organizations can't keep doing it. Salary cap came into play along the way, and that's changed the whole landscape of the NFL. Period, exclamation point.
All right.
Hey, listen, couple of program reminders. I'm going to be on the road next